Hi everybody and welcome to today's auto instruct video on how to disassemble your VE Commodore front strut assembly. In this example I'm using aftermarket springs and shock, except this is also applicable to stock cars. It's the same setup. So today you'll need obviously the strut removed from the car, spring compressors, a 24mm bit for the end nut, and in my case a 21mm bit to tighten the spring compressors. Now I'll be using an impact wrench to do this, which saves a lot of time and effort, but if you don't have an impact wrench you can still do it the traditional way with a shifter or a spanner or a socket set. So first of all you need to put the spring compressors on and tighten them up slightly. So you want to make sure you put them on nice and evenly from either side of the spring. Now the point of the spring compressors is to slightly compress the spring so when you undo the top nut over here, the whole assembly doesn't come flying off at you. With aftermarket springs you'll find that there's very little movement to begin with. But in a stock suspension setup where the springs are quite big, this strut will come flying off. Regardless, I'll put the spring compressors on a little bit just in case there's a bit of tension in the spring. So once that's done, it's time to take off the top nut, which is here. So let me just change out my socket to the 24mm. And this step is quite simple. You're literally just undoing that top nut. Because I've got an impact wrench, I'll be able to put this straight on and undo it without spinning the piston too much. In some cases, if you're doing it by hand with a spanner, you'll need to get another bit to hold the top. So in my example, in the past I've had a big and small shifter, one on the top, which is a flat kind of head. It's not actually a bit of any sort, it's just two flat sides. And then a larger one on the nut, and I was able to spin the nut off. And then once it's loosened, you'll be able to spin it off by hand. But using an impact wrench, you can simply just rattle it off like that. Make sure you hold it nice and tight so you don't damage the thread too much. And once that's off, you'll be able to spin the nut off quite simply and take off the first piece. Take note on which orientation all the bits come off in, because you need to reassemble in that order when you're finished. And as you notice, as I undid it, the whole spring slid up a bit, and it still is going under the pressure, but I'm quite comfortable now that the spring's not going anywhere, and that's due to putting the spring compressors on. Without them, this would have popped off a bit with a bit of force. So once your rubber strut top is off, you simply take off the bearing. Sometimes these bearings can be damaged, and you'll find that the bearings just spill all over the floor once you've taken them off, because it does actually separate, like so. And you seal the bearings inside. These often fall apart and break in the assembly, and this one's not that great either because it's full of dirt, and it came apart very, very easily. As you can see, the bearings are already starting to go everywhere. So you can pick these up new from eBay or Holden if you find that yours is damaged. I'll put them back together. You can take off the rest of the parts, like so. One thing also to take notice of is the rubber strut top. When these fail, you find this gap shrinks and pretty much compresses very, very tightly. And you notice this in the engine bay as the other rubber strut top, which sits inside the engine bay, will be popped up in the air, which is where it shouldn't be. It should be firm against the body. But anyway, this one's in pretty good condition because there's no sign of compression. And the next step is to actually get a pair of side cutters, which I forgot to show in the introduction, to cut off the cable tie. Now this cable tie is simply holding in the rubber boot, the dust protector, to stop the shock absorber assembly from getting dusty. So once that's off, you'll be able to pop it down, revealing the shock. Then it's quite simply a matter of taking off the end piece, which includes the bump stop and the top assembly, and you'll find there's a rubber gasket in here too. Once that's off, the spring will come off quite easily, leaving you with just the strut, the shock, and the boot. And you'll find at the bottom down here, there is another cable tie. It's kind of hard to see. There's another cable tie just down there. If you're changing the shock absorber over, you'll need to take off this one as well, being careful not to actually cut the rubber boot. If you're only changing your springs, such as lowering the car, you won't need to do this on the stock shock. And that's it. There's also a final rubber seat for the spring. And there you have it, the shock completely disassembled. As I said in the introduction, this is an aftermarket KYB shock, but the same process applies for stock shocks and stock spring setups. And in order to put it back together, you simply reverse the process of putting everything back together how you pretty much took it off, taking note. You can almost watch the video again to understand how it happens. One thing to take note of, this is probably the most crucial part, is when putting the top spring rubber seat in and top mount, to line up this rubber seat with the end of the spring, you'll see there's a little notch in it. That simply sits on it like that. Likewise with this top plate, it needs to go in line like that, because if you have it off, it will not go down properly. So you need to make sure they're both like that. And other than that, it's actually pretty simple, the rest of it. Yeah, just make sure you follow the exact way you took it off and put it back together, and you'll be set to go.